It is a riding that holds some of the wealthiest addresses in Canada and also some of the poorest. It's ethnically diverse, has 2 universities within its boundaries, and has seen a Liberal member hold the seat since 1993, although the NDP were nipping at their heels in the last federal election in 2011. Let's get into it with the 4 main candidates for Toronto Centre, and we'll introduce them in the order in which their parties hold seats in the House of Commons. They are: Jeff Pollak is the candidate for the Conservative Party of Canada, Linda Mcquaig, candidate for the New Democratic Party of Canada, Chrystia Freeland, candidate for the Liberal Party of Canada, and John Deverell. He's a candidate for the Green Party of Canada. And it's great to welcome you 4 candidates around the table tonight. Thanks for joining us here at TVO.
Thank you to have us.
I'm not going to operate under the assumption that everybody knows who all of you are, even though some of you are more famous than others. So let's just start. Tell us all something about yourself. Jeff.
My name is Jeff Pollak, and I'm the Conservative candidate in Toronto Centre. I'm a lawyer by training. I also have a business degree from the Ivey Business School. In order to put myself through university, I spent 5 years as an officer in the Canadian Army Reserves. I live in Toronto Centre with my wife and my 2 wonderful and energetic children.
Are they really wonderful, Jeff?
They are the greatest joy in my life most of the time.
Most of the time. Okay. Linda.
I'm Linda Mcquaig, and I also have a lovely daughter that I'm extremely proud of. I have deep roots in the riding. I've been an author and journalist throughout my career, and my focus has always been particularly on the problem of rising inequality, and particularly the impact that has on the lives of Canadians.
How many books you written?
Well, 9.
That's not bad. Okay. Chrystia.
My name is Chrystia Freeland. I was born and raised in a small town in northern Alberta. I went on from there to have a wonderful career as an international journalist and editor. Along the way, I married a great guy and had 3 great kids who also are 99% of the time great, maybe 1% of the time keep me up at night. My big focus has been in my work recently and right now politically on the squeezed middle class, and that's what I want to make the center of my personal agenda and of the agenda for the Liberal Party, and I live in Toronto Centre.
What language do you speak to your kids in?
I speak Ukrainian to my children only. They're only allowed to speak English to me when we're at supper with their dad, but if they ask for something in English, they don't get it.
And how's the Ukrainian?
It's really good. It's real good, and they go to Ukrainian school. Actually, we spend our Saturdays in Etobicoke, which is where the Ukrainian school is.
Gotcha. John.
John Deverell has spent 25 years writing labor, business, and politics for the Toronto Star. Lived in central Toronto all of that time. And in terms of interests beyond the reportage, I'm the founding treasurer of Fair Vote Canada, which is the national multi-partisan campaign for democratic voting in this country. We aren't there yet.
Democratic voting meaning?
Meaning equal effective votes and proportional representation.
You don't like first past the post?
I detest it, as do most Canadians now, I think.
Okay, good. Now that we know a little bit more about you, let's get into the issues and it is amazing. I mean, of all the elections I've ever covered, I can't ever remember 3 so high-profile journalists all running in one riding at the same time. There's a show there somewhere. This may not be it, but I'm sure that...
Steve, how about you? Are you interested in throwing your hat?
On to the first question. Away we go. The answer is no. That's why I'm sitting in this chair. Let's start with this. You all have very interesting backgrounds and biographies, but I want to know what you think separates you from the rest of you when it comes to representing Toronto Centre in Parliament. Jeff.
Well, my name is Jeff Pollak, and I'm the one who's not a journalist here.
Nobody's perfect, Jeff.
You think we need more lawyers in politics?
Well, it was interesting. When I was a child growing up, my father was a doctor and my mother was a nurse, and they were asking me what I wanted to study, and I was thinking to myself, what does the world need more of than anything else? More lawyers.
So you decided to be a lawyer. What makes you think suitable to represent this riding in Parliament?
Well, one of the things that I bring to the table is I bring a deep passion and commitment to my community. I've already served my country as an officer in the Canadian Armed Forces, and I currently give back by providing pro bono legal services through Pro Bono Law Ontario. What I do is every few months, I take a day off of my practice, go in and volunteer for members of the community who are disadvantaged and help them with their complex legal issues.
What kind of practice is it, Jeff?
I have a real estate practice, and I also focus on civil litigation and wills and estates.
Okay. Linda, how about you? What makes you uniquely qualified right now to be the member?
Well, I would say that my deep roots in the riding are of significance. I mean, I think that it matters to have been here and to have experienced life in Toronto and to have been focused on Canadian issues the way I have been. I would also say that I have a focus, as I said, on the problem of rising inequality. Christia has mentioned as well that she focuses on the squeeze on the middle class, similar kinds of issues. But I would point out there's quite a bit of difference between the approach that Christia takes and the approach that I take.
We're going to flesh that out.
But one of the big differences is I'm offering solutions, and I'm not hearing solutions from her. But I'm sure we'll get into this.
We are going to on the second go-around. Okay, why do you think you're uniquely qualified to represent the riding in Parliament?
Well, I think, I see this as the biggest job interview I've ever done, with 134,000 people interviewing me. And I think the special skills and understanding that I bring are the work I've done on the world economy, what's changing in the world economy. And I'm really proud, actually, that this week I was endorsed by 3 of the top thinkers about the world economy who live in Toronto: Roger Martin, Richard Florida, and Don Tapscott. And what I would like to bring to the people of Toronto Centre is working with them to figure out how Canada and how each individual Canadian in Toronto Centre and Canadian company can prosper in this rapidly changing world economy.
John, why should it be you?
I'm here because, in my view, Toronto Centre can speak for the whole country and to the whole country, because it's the only by-election in Ontario and in the media capital of Canada, that our priorities are the same here as everywhere else. We need something positive done about climate change, and it's not going to happen as long as we have the present government. That's true here, and that's true everywhere in the country. So let's say it on November 25th. And the other thing is, we actually need a democratic voting system so that our parliament will never again be captured by a rogue minority like the Harper Conservative minority. We need genuine democratic parliament and democratic majority governments, true majorities, and that is the most urgent question facing Toronto Centre and all Canadians.
Okay, a couple things to follow up on here. Let's start with that one. A rogue minority government that he says your party was basically running from 2006 until it won its majority in 2011.
I'm saying it's still a rogue because it's never had more than 39% of the vote. And yet it's behaving as if it had a majority mandate. It does not.
They have a majority government, but never the majority of the votes.
But not a mandate from the people, just
Understood.
A mandate from a wonky voting system.
Could you speak to that, Jeff?
I couldn't disagree more with my friend. We very much support the system, the Westminster-based parliamentary system. I share with you, Steve, a passion for parliamentary democracy. We've both been involved in an organization that promotes it, the largest Canadian
Do me a favor, guys.
not-for-profit.
Don't bring me into this, okay? This is your debate. I'm just
trying
sitting
to
here.
recruit you just to run.
Just go ahead, Jeff.
But
Leave me out of it.
But with respect to that, we have been very well served by the government. And one of the things that we have done as a government is we've been able to focus on the economy, steer Canada through extremely perilous economic times.
Okay, that's not his point, though. His point is you're really not representative of Canadians. You don't really have the mandate you think you do.
Well, we would completely disagree. We would say that the Westminster system has produced some of the most stable and important governments and throughout the history, or to quote my hero, it is without question the worst system of government, with the single exception of every other system that's ever been tried.
That's Winston Churchill.
From time to time.
Okay, from time to time. All right, I'm going to pick up on a comment I heard from Linda Mcquaig and put it to you.
Can I just quickly add that I agree with John about the importance of proportional representation and climate change.
Your party's never done anything about it.
My party hasn't been in power.
Your party was in a position to demand it be a part of the parliamentary agenda when you held the balance of power and you didn't do anything about it.
Well, there was so many things to demand on. The point is that the NDP has long supported proportional representation and action on climate change. I'm just simply saying I agree with John on those things.
Okay.
If I could
And
just
they're
chip in on the
important.
climate change point, I think that Paul Martin and Canada would have had a much better shot at acting on climate change and acting on Kyoto were it not for the actions of the NDP.
Well, are we into climate change? I mean, how do you?
I think we should let Steve carry on, but since you
Justin Trudeau just went
in,
down to Washington and endorsed the Keystone Pipeline. Do you support that, Christian?
well, actually, I think that all three parties have a very similar position when it comes to the oil sands, which is that all of the parties are in favor of the continued expansion and development of the oil sands. And Tom Mulcair has gone to Alberta and said, I want to be a partner of the oil sands. And I would just let me finish, Linda, please. And the NDP position is to be in favor of the East-West pipeline. Now, if your primary issue with Keystone is on environmental grounds, then I think it's really hypocritical to support a pipeline that goes east-west and not to support
Linda?
when it goes south.
Actually, the NDP supports the Climate Accountability Act, which was introduced by Jack Layton, in fact passed by the Parliament, killed in the Senate by the unelected senators, and that would have put Canada within the UN framework of sustainable development. The Keystone Pipeline is not in any ways within the framework, the UN framework.
How is it okay to support east-west and not Keystone?
Well, first of all,
why does that make sense?
What we say on the east-west thing is that the east-west pipeline, any pipeline, okay, will have to go through a legitimate environmental review process. Just a second, which would if the NDP were in power, would have to be within the Climate Accountability Act. The problem is we don't have a reasonable environmental assessment process now because it's been totally gutted by Jeff's rogue government. And you know, until we have that, we do not support that line.
John,
No, but you have
John,
supported
let's get equal
east-west.
time. John, please.
I'd like to, since I kicked this off,
And you are the green guy, John.
I am the green guy. If we started, the tar sands are there. The government wants to overdevelop them massively and rapidly, contrary to all of the indications of what the international conferences are saying. I'd say a rational parliament, a democratic parliament, would do what most Canadians would say, which is first of all, cut the subsidies to the oil companies.
Absolutely.
Why the hell are we goosing it? When you know, let's just see what the market would do by itself. But then beyond that, put a carbon tax on because we don't want all those greenhouse gases. So let's manage the demand instead of goosing the supply, manage the demand, and then see how much tar sands oil is required. But this notion of putting the development on steroids is a kind of craziness which could only be accomplished by an undemocratic minority party, which is in command of our parliament.
Jeff.
And actually, John has brought up something that really separates the Conservative Party and the Harper government from all of the parties of my other friend. We are the only party that has not talked about and is committed not to bringing a carbon tax in. John has talked about it. The NDP have talked about it various times. The Liberal Party of Canada has talked about a carbon tax, but we are the only party that will not bring in a job-killing carbon tax.
Do you think that's a responsible position?
Absolutely.
How come?
Bringing in a carbon tax would have devastating impact to the Canadian economy, and we are a party that have put the creation of jobs, protection of jobs, and the Canadian economy first and foremost.
But what about climate change, Jeff? I mean, do you not consider that that's a serious crisis facing the world?
Thank you for asking me about that. Since 2005, the greenhouse gases in this country have decreased by 4.8%.
The Harper government.
The difference between us is that the Conservative approach is to look at pragmatic ways that we can reduce this over time that will not destroy our economy.
You pulled out of Kyoto. You have been a force of obstructionism to all world efforts to get some action on climate change. Canada routinely gets the Fossil of the Year award under Harper because of your obstructionist attitudes and obstructionist actions on climate change.
Can I jump in super quickly? I hate to gang up on Jeff here, but you know, for me, the real irony of the situation is the Conservative government, which is indeed the biggest champion of Keystone, actually, through its obstructionist environmental policy that Linda has been talking about, that has actually stood in the way of Keystone approval. And one of the things for me that is actually really in its own terms, a failure of the Harper government is failure to get Keystone approved. And that has happened, ironically, precisely because of the international environmental intransigence that Linda's been talking about.
But then, Krista, where does that leave us? Doesn't that leave us not supporting Keystone? Are you supporting it? Your leader seems to be supporting it.
Our leader is, and our official position, which I think has to be the position of any party which is in favor of oil sands expansion and development, which is what Tom Mulcair says when he is in Western Canada. He has said, he is on the record saying, and we'll tweet out the video clip if you'd like, when he goes to the West, he says, I will be, the NDP will be a partner in the oil sands.
But it's
if that's the case, then it's just hypocritical to say we're opposed to any pipelines that would take that oil to market. What's the idea going to be?
The NDP is not opposed to development of resources. But
so then they have to get to
market. Let me finish. It has to take place within the context of sustainable development.
I agree.
The NDP set that out very clearly in the Climate Accountability Act.
Okay, let me jump in here. I want to put another issue on the table, which is, you said something in your second answer, I think, which is that you think you are best able to represent the riding because, quote, I've been here. And that's clearly a shot at Christia, who's lived in the States for the last 10 years. And I'm 6 years, sorry.
Well, outside the country for 10 years. Though.
Outside the country for 10, States for 6. Yeah. I want to give you a chance to speak to this issue because obviously she's making an issue of it.
She sure is, and I do have to say I have been disappointed by the negative and personal nature of some of the NDP campaign. I thought that the NDP was better than taking a leaf from not Jeff's personal playbook, which is very nice, but the Conservative Party's really sort of vicious playbook of personal attack. So that's been disappointing for me. Having said that, I have the good fortune to have been born in Canada. My eldest daughter has the good fortune to be born in Toronto Centre. But there is no back of the bus in Toronto Centre. Whether you are descended from United Empire Loyalists or you became a citizen yesterday, you are an equal participant in this society. And actually, half of the people in Toronto aren't born outside of Canada. So I feel both in terms of representing the riding and also as someone who can be an advocate for Canada's place and the place of each of us in the world economy. My international experience is something I'm sort of actively putting forward and saying this is a skill I bring to the party.
Can I respond to that? Because
and then John after.
No, but Christia's accusing me of a negative campaign. I honestly believe my campaign has been extremely positive, and it hasn't been personal. Now, you've said many times you're applying for, this is a job interview. Isn't it fair then for us to see your resume? And doesn't your resume include where you've been for the past 10 years and where your focus has been? You've been focused on writing about America and the global economy, not focused on Canada. Frankly, when you use terms like back of the bus, that's like a term from the civil rights struggle. I mean,
but would you
but that's not what's going on here.
Arguing for Toronto from Toronto is a way. I mean, doesn't that delegitimize people who haven't been here for generations?
Of course it does not. You have all the rights in the world, as do everyone else. The question is being outside the country, in fact, for most of the past 20 years, is that the best preparation and the best training and the best experience to represent the people that live here?
Well, would you say her international experience is useless in this situation?
No, I think her international experience is just fine. I have international experience too, but I always come back to Toronto. My point is it, to have a focus that's primarily outside the country, and in her book, for instance, it's mostly about America.
John, you wanted to say?
I wanted to, I hate to dwell on the question of residency when we could talk about this attitude of the Conservative Party towards doing something about climate change. Now, we have our friend here aping his government and saying a carbon tax, people hate taxes, therefore Santa Claus will protect you from taxes. Now, that's a way of campaigning, but it doesn't do anything about greenhouse gas production. In fact, we still have the party promoting greenhouse gas production, which is a problem not just here, but around the world. Now, a positive approach to politics would say, let's have a carbon tax, but let's figure out how to make it so that people don't hate it. And what the Green Party is suggesting, since we know that we also have equity problems and problems of inadequate household income in this country, take the revenue from the carbon tax, which needs to exist. We need the carbon tax to change our behavior, all of us, get everybody in the game.
And do what with it?
And then rebate it to Canadians as a Canada income supplement for every breathing Canadian 18 years and older. Now you've dealt with some questions about low wages, you've dealt with some questions about students with inadequate income, and you're saying the carbon tax is not being kept to expand the government, it's coming back to you, just don't spend it on fossil fuels if you can avoid it. That's an approach which takes two problems and addresses them both in a positive way.
I do need to say something. Hang on a sec, Christian, because I don't want to let this hour get too far by if we spend the whole time talking carbon tax and not something that I know all of you are seized of, which is income inequality, and has a particularly important issue in Toronto Centre where you have so many rich people and so many low-income people. Here's the issue I want to throw out there and then get some discussion going on this. Basically, every government in the world has tried to do something about income inequality, and my sense is that the public doesn't think that anybody's got any solutions on this, or that any governments have been prepared to do what it takes to really make progress on this. Why am I wrong in thinking that? Or am I?
Can
Christian,
I
go ahead.
quickly, before answering that, can I just quickly go back to my CV, because Linda had the last word, and since it was about me, I think that's not quite fair. May I?
Christia.
Super fast.
Let's hear it.
Okay, so just super fast, I would like to say, you know, I really think that all Canadians understand, all people of Toronto understand, you need to understand the world, and that is not disqualifying, that is qualified.
I get
The
you.
international experience the people who have moved to Toronto bring is a plus for the city. The international
Okay,
experience
we get
international
you.
business people have. So
We
anyway,
understand.
final word. I think you're right, Steve. I mean, right now, all governments, certainly in the West, are grappling with this issue of income inequality. It is not unique to Canada, and people are waking up to the fact that this is a problem. And I think it is really disingenuous of politicians to say, of anyone to say, here's the 5-point plan I have that's going to fix everything, because no one has one yet. I think that we are the party that has put it on the agenda in Canada. Justin started that. I've been writing about that, and we have some areas that we want to focus on. Social mobility, entrepreneurship, expanding Canada's role in the world economy, building sustainable capitalism in partnership with companies. But anyone who says, I have an easy solution, a magic bullet, I don't think is really grappling with the problem, honestly.
Linda, what's
Well,
on your
first
list?
of all, Steve, I disagree with the contention that governments are trying to grapple with income inequality. I don't think they are. I think some governments are, like the Scandinavian governments have done a terrific job dealing with it. But the Anglo-American countries, particularly the United States, Canada, and Britain, are not particularly concerned about it. And for instance, here in Canada, the dramatic increase in income inequality, it's not some surprising thing, like how did this happen? It happened because of a very specific set of policies, the economic policies that were put in place by both liberal and conservative governments. So it's not something magical that we can't understand. And the point is that there are solutions. They involve reversing the approach sometimes known as Thatcherism, which is, consists of tax cuts for the rich, social spending cuts, privatization, deregulation, a tax on labor. It's a whole package of things that we've seen in the Anglo-American countries since 1980. And we've got to reverse those. We've got to focus on policies for affordable housing and all kinds of income supports that have been whittled away, more focus on job creation and a fair tax system. We know how to correct these problems. I mean,
So it's a question of political will.
Yeah, exactly. Like Christian makes it sound like, those are sort of old solutions. The truth is sometimes methods that have been tried and proven effective are worth using. I mean, democracy is an old solution too.
Let me get Jeff. Jeff,
I couldn't agree with you more. The methods that have been tried and proven effective should be used. And this is one of the things that the Harper government has done. One of the first acts that we did was to lower the GST. We were to lower it from 7% to 6%, then to 5%.
is that a good idea?
It is a great idea. What it does is it helps reduce the tax burden on Canadians. It also helped reduce the tax burden on those, the lower income Canadians. We also then increased the basic personal exemption. There are fewer Canadians on the tax rolls right now than there have been on a generation. This government has brought in $3,200 worth of tax cuts per Canadian family. And really, if we look at what is said by my two friends, they really are talking about the same thing, just a little bit
Can I ask the
different
follow-up here?
words.
By cutting taxes, and if that has resulted, I'd put a big if on this, in a concomitant reduction in revenues, what's that cost Canadians?
It has reduced the revenues a bit. One of the things that the Canadian government has done, as I said, was reduce the taxes. However, it's also increased the Canadian economy. And this government is very proud of its job creation record.
John.
Here we have, not only do we want to maximize greenhouse gas production, but we want to encourage consumption. We're going to cut the GST, which is a consumption tax. You can think many things of it. The government has to get its money from somewhere. The GST, the consumption taxes, are very visible. People understand that they're paying a tax. That's a good thing in a free and democratic society. You should be able to see your taxes. And the idea that they're being cut, and I'll bet you they'll promise to do it again, and they won't cut the personal income tax, or they won't cut some of the other things. They'll cut the GST again, against all of the advice. And when you cut the GST, you're also, not only are you encouraging consumption, you're discouraging saving. Now then we'll be told that we have pension problems and that we have people, seniors with inadequate incomes. We have a government which is encouraging people to spend now, don't save.
Okay, but the issue
this is a mistake.
The issue is income inequality. Give me an idea the Green Party has that would
Well, I gave
reduce
you my one idea. I mean, the Green Party, if we read the policy book, and Lord knows it's thick, one of the ideas in it is the guaranteed annual income. Now, personally, I think that the guaranteed annual income is nothing that we're going to rush to in one step. But I just described a process to you whereby you take a tax that people might dislike and you turn it into something that a great portion of the population would say, that's positive. I can see why we're doing that. The Canada Income Supplement, just for being a Canadian. That starts to move some money around without creating bureaucracy, without getting means tests, without creating any possibility of government playing Santa Claus piece by piece, splitting off this vote or that, bribing, boutique bribes.
If
right?
we put a price on carbon and those who are the bigger polluters ended up having to pay dramatically more, would we lose jobs if that happened?
You can any change. The capitalism is a very radical economic system because it's pushing change on people all the time. Generally speaking, our attitude towards that is, on balance, these changes are raising the standard of living. There are problems involved. That's why the welfare state was invented, was to cushion the adjustments. And that's what we would be doing with a Canada Income Supplement.
You wanted to follow up on something you heard over here, I think.
Yeah, I actually wanted to follow up on something that Jeff and Linda both said, which is this idea that we don't need some new solutions and new ideas. And, I think that both of you are representing policies that your parties probably would have advocated in the 80s.
I don't think they said that. I don't think they said that. They said that if it's tried, tested, and true, you can do that, even if it's an old idea.
And Jeff said that too, right?
Okay.
And the thing is, I think to your point of the question, Steve, we're grappling, and not just us, but Western industrialized countries, with a whole new way the world economy is working. Technology has, the Scandinavian countries have the same level of income inequality in pre-market incomes, in market incomes, so pre-tax incomes. Sweden actually has, it's actually true. Sweden actually, in pre-tax and pre-benefits, Sweden has experienced the same surge in income inequality as Canada has. So governments can intervene, but what we've seen, which is really different, is it used to be that increased GDP fed directly into increased incomes for the middle class. That's not happening anymore. It's a big change, and we need to be honest and face it and say, okay, the economy has changed, public policy has to change.
Steve, I guess my point is that the economies may have changed. The economy's always changing. The global economy's been changing for years. But there are countries in the world that are dealing with it. And so my point is, we can deal with it too. We're not stuck with this.
I agree. There are countries that are dealing with it better, but I don't think any country feels like it has the answer. Go talk to the Swedes, talk to the Germans, talk to the Swiss, and they still see it as a huge problem.
Huge inroads.
Okay, so give us one idea that you would like to see implemented that you think would deal with income inequality.
Oh, well, all the things I mentioned about strengthening social supports, more, an affordable housing program. I mean, these kind of things would make an amazing difference. I also would point out that the tax system is very important. And frankly, what both the Conservative and Liberal governments have done since 2000 is they've cut the corporate the tax rate in half. We down from 29 to 15%.
That was a bad thing?
Yes, it was a bad thing. I'll tell you why. Because they always did it. The justification was always it would create jobs. Jobs are terribly important, but it didn't create jobs. The reason it didn't was because it wasn't linked to jobs. It was just an across the board.
Or we went into a global recession and no one was hiring.
No. But just a second. In fairness, remember Mark Carney, the former Bank of Canada governor, last year made the point. He was criticizing business, saying, you guys are sitting on more than $500 billion of dead money that you're not investing. Our point is, the NDP says we can raise those corporate taxes, collect an awful lot of revenue that is desperately needed for public programs, make our tax system fair. And if there's going to be corporate tax cuts, link them directly to job creation.
What's wrong with that, Christian?
I think that now is not the time to raise taxes on any Canadians. And as I've been canvassing in Toronto Centre, I can tell you no one has come to the door and said the answer is raise my taxes.
Even corporations? Even corporations?
I wouldn't raise corporate taxes right now because my big concern is how anemic growth is. Growth is actually at 1.7% right now. Youth unemployment in Toronto Centre is 18%. This is not a moment to announce, hey, we're raising taxes. And the good news is we don't have to. Central bank interest rates in Canada and around the world are incredibly cheap. I think we could be entering a period of secular stagnation when money for governments is cheap. So let's build our infrastructure, but let's not increase the burden on business right now.
If corporations are sitting on all that dead money, isn't one way to loosen up that money to raise their taxes and put it towards some kind of public good?
I don't think that you're going to see a huge increase in jobs or increase in job activity in Canada if you raise taxes.
If you link it to job
Hang on, Jeff, please.
Well, I was interested with what you said, and I was encouraged to hear that you said that you wouldn't raise taxes, but I noticed the right now. And you talked about growth being anemic, so this is the question. Are you going to raise taxes in the future? What would trigger the increase in taxes? And you mentioned that the money for government is very cheap right now, the interest rates are low, and you think we're going to continue in this trend. So the implication with that is that you're going to embark on deficit spending. And this is really contrary to what we as a government take as our philosophy, which is to be very conservative, very fiscally prudent. And this is why we're going to be returning to surplus.
Jeff, have the Conservatives ever raised taxes?
Yes, we have.
Have they ever raised employment insurance premiums?
We have.
So,
But we have.
what am I missing here?
One of the things that we have done as a government, we have lowered taxes overall. We've lowered the tax burden by $3,200 per Canadian family. Is there some rejigging of the tax system at times? Yes, there is.
John.
We're still trapped in a vocabulary here. We have all the other parties, except the Green Party, saying our objective should be to stimulate growth. Well, why are they saying that? We know, in fact, that that can't be right, because trying to limitlessly expand the consumer economy and then what? Expecting China and India to imitate that? We all know that that is in fact impossible, and in fact...
Are you against economic growth?
I am against the pattern of economic growth. We are now having to inject, the United States injecting $85 billion a month in order to try to stimulate what we're calling anemic growth. Stimulate the American consumerist society to be even more peculiar than it is? This is not wise policy. Clearly, what should be happening, except it can't happen in the United Kingdom, the United States, and Canada because of the wretched condition of our legislatures and our political institutions, which are failing miserably to define a realistic conversation about sustainable economics, which is not limitless consumer growth. Cutting consumer taxes is not a great idea. We should be stimulating some saving and some more prudent behavior all around. We have to change our language. We will not change our language until we get democratic legislatures where people can speak the truth.
Christian.
I just want to speak up in favor of economic growth. We really need it. That's what that 18% of young people in Toronto Centre who don't have jobs
They need jobs.
They need jobs, and the way they get jobs is through economic growth. And it's just incredibly dangerous for Toronto, for Canada, and I'm especially worried about the young generation to say we need to stop growth. Now, our generation, maybe we're okay, But what about those kids? We want our children to have a better life than we did, and we want the new Canadian.
I am not advocating unemployment. I'm advocating let's redefine what we
and
mean by growth.
we need jobs for the new Canadians.
Linda, please.
In fairness, Christia, if you're talking about job creation, you know, I think you'll have to acknowledge that your own record on protecting middle-class jobs is not that good.
What are you referring
well,
to?
what I'm referring to is the fact that when Christia was senior executive at Thomson Reuters in New York, she oversaw the outsourcing of 25 good Toronto-based jobs to India, and you've defended that sort of corporate practice as smart business practices.
Christian.
Well, I'm glad, Linda, that you think that I could single-handedly have stopped the shrinking of newsrooms in North America, which happened before I became an editor, happened while I was an editor, and continues. And in fact, the week that that story came out, the Toronto Star announced that they were laying off 75 people. Since I left Reuters, they've announced they're laying off 5% of their North American newsroom, and Bloomberg, which is the best financed organization, announced layoffs of 150 people. So it is, I mean, it is a little bit ridiculous, and this does go back to the negative personal attack that I was talking about, to suggest that the shrinking of newsrooms is somehow my personal responsibility. What I would say, though, is my own experience being inside a company that I'm very proud to have worked for, Thomson Reuters, a great global Canadian company, as it faced these new economic forces, has given me some real understanding of the forces that businesses face. And I think that it's very tempting when we look at the pressures on the middle class to say, I am going to run a rhetoric which pits Regent Park against Rosedale, which says the decisions taken by business are what's killing the middle class. I think that there are some powerful changes in the economy, and we're going to reach solutions by uniting people.
First of all, I did not say that you alone are responsible for what's happening with corporate downsizing and outsourcing.
And the shrinking of newsrooms, which is we're an industry that's particularly under pressure.
I did say that you were part of the executive team that approved that without apparently any protest on your part. And you know,
I don't think, Linda, there's a single person who's been an editor while I was an editor in a news organization that didn't have a shrinking newsroom. There isn't. Can you name a news organization that didn't shrink?
Furthermore, you have defended that sort of outsourcing. You did it in the Washington Post. You did it on the Lang and O'Leary Exchange. You've defended it as good corporate practices. It may be good for corporate bottom lines and shareholders.
So would you
but
outlaw
it's not. No, I'm not outlawing it. But I'm not outlawing it. But I wouldn't defend it. I wouldn't defend it, and I certainly wouldn't then turn around and run for Parliament on the on the stance of defending ordinary workers.
I got to follow up one thing with you, and then I'm going to go to Jeff, and then we're going to put a new topic on the table. Yes to economic growth. Yes to economic growth. No to economic growth.
Yes to sustainable economic growth. Of course, we want economic growth, but it must be sustainable. That's the whole environmental argument, and I fully support it.
Jeff.
Well, Linda was just talking about the record of job creation. She was criticizing my friend with that. But why don't we talk about real job creation? Canada, since the depths of the recession, led the G7 in economic growth. We led the G7 in job creation. We created almost 1 million new jobs for Canadians. And one of the things this government has done is just sign forth a free trade agreement with the European Union. This is going to add another 80,000 new jobs, another 12 billion in GDP, which is equivalent of $1,000 per household, per family in Canada.
Okay, thank you. Let me put one more issue on the table here. We're a little over 10 minutes to go here. And you are, I don't mean this to sound facetious actually as I say it, but as the words come out of my mouth, I'm sure there's a good punchline here. None of you are running for city council, by which I mean you're not running just as who you are. You are also running on party banners. You are also representing leaders as you knock on doors and seek people's endorsements. And so I think it's fair to ask you some questions here that relate to some stuff about your leaders and your parties. So here we go. Senate. Your Prime Minister appointed 3 people to the Senate who've been suspended in extremely controversial and unhappy circumstances, and he seems to have, what's the charitable way of describing this? Evolving positions on what actually went down during that whole period, as it relates to his Chief of Staff, as it relates to all of that stuff. Has your party been covered in glory on this whole Senate story?
There were 4 senators who abused the public trust. They claimed expenses they ought not to have. One of the senators resigned rather than be removed from the public payroll.
That was Mcquaig, the Liberal.
Indeed. The other 3 senators, the Prime Minister was very clear and said that they have to be removed from the public payroll. They broke the public trust. They were removed from the public payroll.
It's not quite what my question was. My question was about the performance of the Prime Minister and whether when you knock on doors, you're happy to defend it.
I am very proud to be on the Stephen Harper Conservative team.
Period, full stop. Okay, stand by, John. Hang on, John.
I'm extremely proud to be representing the government on all of the issues in this riding.
The Prime Minister's office bribes a senator, and there are no consequences to the Prime Minister.
You want to come back on that?
We're talking about the issue with Mr. Wright. Mr. Wright made a mistake. Mr. Wright owed up to the mistake. He admitted that he made a mistake. Please, just a moment.
The entire PMO was involved.
He admitted he made a mistake. He offered his resignation. The Prime Minister accepted it. There were 4 senators that abused the public trust, one of whom resigned. The other 3 were removed by this Prime Minister. And at the time, Justin Trudeau's Liberals voted against removing these senators from the public payroll.
Okay, just one fast follow-up here, because I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but the PM didn't exactly put it that way when he described it. You said Nigel Wright offered his resignation, the PM accepted it. The PM also said a week later that he fired Nigel Wright for bad performance.
The story keeps changing.
I mean, those aren't the same things. Can you help us understand this any better?
As I said earlier, Mr. Wright offered his resignation. The Prime Minister accepted it. Mr. Wright made a mistake. Mr. Wright admitted his mistakes, and Mr. Wright paid the price.
Okay, Christia, here we go. What was Justin Trudeau saying when he said those silly things the other day about China?
Well, I spent yesterday campaigning with Justin, and he was asked that question often. And his point is, obviously, Canada is the best country in the world to live in. That's why I've come back. And as someone who actually wrote about the collapse of communism, I have very strong and developed views about the fragility and the long-term ineffectiveness of communism as a governing system. But Justin's point was Canada is competing in the global economy, a global economy in which China is a rising player. And so we have to really be aware of and thoughtful about what China is doing.
That's not what he said, though. That's not what he said. What he said was he had respect for the Chinese way of doing things. Admire. Which is, it's a pretty, I mean, I see that everybody in the Liberal Party I've talked to about this pretty uncomfortable with the way this went down. And I think you are too, aren't you?
I'm not going to put any words in Justin's mouth.
The words he said.
No, so I'm not going to put words in Justin's mouth in elaborating on those comments. I know, and I think everyone who is serious knows, that Justin is a fan of democracy and is not a believer in Chinese communist dictatorship. And unlike some people who have been kind of chummy with Hugo Chavez, if we want to go there, Linda.
I interviewed him for a book.
And shared a sundae and wrote admiring things about him. But what Justin was talking about was that authoritarian systems can sometimes be quicker to take decisions.
Okay, but
since we are competing in a world economy with some authoritarian regimes, we need to be aware of that. The only other thing I would say is, look, anyone who is on tape 10 hours a day, as all of the leaders of the parties are, is sometimes going to say something that doesn't make an ideal soundbite.
No question about that. The question is, did he commit a gaffe? And a gaffe in politics is when you accidentally tell the truth.
Michael Kinsley. No.
Right.
I don't think that Justin revealed a hitherto unsuspected admiration for Chinese dictatorship. And I don't think any of us really think that.
Here's my problem, Steve.
Yeah.
Our friend here says that Justin Trudeau is a fan of democracy. If he were, he'd be advocating democracy for Canadians. He'd be advocating equal effective votes, a democratic legislature, true majority governments. Justin Trudeau is running around the country saying, replace this phony majority with my phony majority. Replace this dictator Harper with me.
Can honorable people disagree on whether first past the post or PR are the best way to go?
No, it's a definition. The Charter of Rights and Freedoms says that Canadians are entitled to equal treatment under the law from the state. Now, surely the most fundamental of all would be equal representation in the parliament. We have half the population casting placebo ballots that elect nobody. There's no accountability in a system like that. That's why it's impossible to hold Stephen Harper to account, because there aren't enough. He should only have 39% of the House. He has way more than that. So that's the flaw in our system.
John, the
But
theory
with
is
due
you hold them
respect,
the theory is you hold them to account in the next election.
Yeah, and now we have two parties running around saying, make us the next dictators, instead of running around saying,
Okay.
change the system so that this could never happen
I get you.
again.
But
I get your
since we've been
position.
talking about real authoritarian regimes like China, can't we accept that even if you don't like Stephen Harper and even if you don't like our political system, it's not a dictatorship, and there is a really clear line between Canadian
No, I wish
democracy,
it were
flawed though
clear.
it may be,
I wish it's not a flawed
authoritarian
democracy. It's a
one-party
sham.
systems.
We have a sham democracy, and all we're saying here is, why the hell aren't you campaigning for a real one? Why can't every Canadian have a meaningful vote? You want to talk about the participation of youth? How about the participation of everybody? We have a population now in which half of the people don't regard the ballot as worth casting. And to some extent, they're right.
Okay.
Because half of them are hitting the elevator button and there's no elevator coming.
Linda, I don't think your leader is as aggressive on raising taxes on those who you would like to see them raised on as you are. And I wonder how you resolve that.
Well, actually, I resolve it this way. I say that, in fact, Tom Mulcair and I both want a more progressive tax system, okay? And there's many different ways to do that, and I've written about all of them over the years, okay? And the one that Tom Mulcair is pushing is raising the corporate tax, which I talked about earlier, for all the reasons that I think, that I mentioned earlier. I'm very excited about that. I'm thrilled at the idea of raising the corporate tax. I think it'll make the tax system a lot fairer.
Do you expect to bring him over to your position, or does he expect you to come to his position?
I expect that we're going to result in having a more progressive tax system.
So
okay?
long-term plan is higher personal income taxes?
There's many different ways to skin the cat of progressive taxes, but can I just
That sounds like a yes to me, Linda.
Can I just say, I think raising the corporate tax, we could collect billions extra every year.
Hang on. One meeting, everybody.
We
Hang
could
on.
raise billions extra every year through that. But can I just come back to this point about accountability? Because John keeps going on about how we can't hold Stephen Harper to account. If we're talking about leaders, I would say you've got to admit, as even people like Rex Murphy are admitting, that Tom Mulcair is doing a fantastic job in the House of Commons holding Stephen Harper to account on the Senate scandal, asking the kind of questions that are really getting under Harper's skin. And I think that's made a huge difference.
Let me ask you about Quebec. Do you believe 50% plus one is enough to break up the country?
Yes, I do. I think that 50% plus one is at least a fair and clear question. By the way, Steve, do you know that 50% plus one was the basis upon which Newfoundland entered Confederation? So it's not like there isn't precedent for this kind of thing.
Breaking up the country is a bigger deal than entering Confederation? Linda, I'd really like to pause on this because it frightens
I'm not
me.
going to take
It's a decision for my children.
somebody that hasn't even been in the country.
Hang on. You finish your point, and then we'll go over here.
Talk to me about how important it is to
Stand
hold
by,
the
everybody.
country together.
Let's bring this back to you. You will finish your point. Christian will finish her point. Then Jeff.
The truth is, in the last federal election, it was thanks to the NDP that now, for the first time in a generation, we have a majority of Federalist MPs in Parliament from Quebec. Okay, that is great news for Canada. That is because of the NDP. And in fact, it was the Liberals, and I'd love to know what your clear question would be, what your number would be, because you never say. It was the Liberals in the early 90s that so alienated Quebec that we almost lost Quebec in the 1995 referendum, and then we tried to, then they tried to buy off Quebec with the sponsorship scandal.
You wanted to finish your point.
Yeah, just to say, I think it is the height of recklessness and reckless politicking, and I think your leader actually regrets that statement was caught on video, to reopen this question and to say 50 plus 1 is good. It is
You're
reopening,
the ones
and
that's
to
reopening it.
say that 50+1 is enough, that's really dangerous for Canada.
That's been
It
said
goes
for a
far
long time.
beyond. No, it isn't. It goes far beyond what the Supreme Court has said. And for people who are looking, we don't have time to talk about it for a long time. Stephen Dion
that's in
has
the
written a
Unity Act,
great
Christy,
piece.
you may
not
in
hang
the-
on, let's let her
Stephen
finish.
Dion has
Hang
written
on.
a great piece in the Toronto Star about this, and this really goes to the heart of Canada. It's a dangerous can of worms to open up
This is
for
what
political
Liberals do
benefit.
whenever they get. I mean, this is not an issue in Toronto Centre. This.
Steve raised it, and he's in Toronto.
I raised it. You're
I'd like to raise something that you just said as an off-the-cuff remark, but frankly I found very disturbing. You said, I'm not going to take that from somebody who hasn't been in the country. I was frankly shocked when you said that, Linda. And I would have thought, Linda, please let me finish.
Yeah.
I would have expected more for somebody who's representing the party of Jack Layton, who stood for civility and decency. And I expected more from you, Linda.
I just mean I'm not going to take lectures on this from somebody that hasn't been around when most of these debates have been taking place. And by the way, I'm a very civil person, and look at Chris and I smiling at each other. I believe in civilized debate, but I do think that politics involves debate. We have to be able to debate.
We're not denying, but we're saying who is allowed to be part of the debate, and it is disqualifying for people to say. I mean, when you say that, Linda, what about someone who just became a Canadian citizen yesterday? Do you say actually you're not allowed to have an opinion on Quebec? You weren't here during Meech Lake, but Linda, you're the one who started it.
I don't think you said you're not allowed to have an opinion.
You're just not allowed to have an opinion and discussion with Linda.
I'm not going to be lectured by
I wasn't
Liberals.
lecturing.
Yes, you were.
Okay, I'm jumping in here. We've got a few minutes to go. And I do want to ask one of those kind of weird questions, which is the fact that it's an interesting time for journalists to decide they want to go into public life, particularly given what's happening in the Senate right now, where two of the people who are in so much trouble happen to be ex-journalists. You would think that they would get politics and all of the pitfalls because they've been so close to politics all these years, and yet it doesn't seem to have happened that way. Let's quickly go around the table here, and you're not a journalist, but you're a lawyer, which is almost just as bad. So you can tell us what your journalistic background has done for you to prepare you really to understand what being in politics is all about. Okay, go ahead. Christian.
I'd say two things. One, you know about vox popping, right? It's what you do as a young journalist, and you go out on the street and talk to people and ask them questions. It's so much like canvassing. And that sort of direct connection with people and listening to their stories is part of what drew me to journalism and part of what I've really loved about going out and talking to people in Toronto Centre.
Linda.
Well, I definitely think a background in journalism is actually a great thing for a politician in the sense that, as journalists, we deal with these issues all the time. Like we deal with all the kinds of issues we've been talking about today. And so, to me, it was a very small leap from writing and focusing on these issues as a journalist to debating them as a politician.
John.
Well, you learned some things. You learned that it's useful to have opinions, if only to speed up conversations and test people's responses. You learn fairness. And I don't talk about objectivity as a journalist, but I certainly understand fairness. So you learn to understand where different people are coming from and why they're in conflict and so on. The other thing that I learned, and I finally came to the point where I would try to write all my stories without quoting politicians, because in the game that they're required to play, which is to try to seduce 40% of the electorate at every moment, at least. A great deal of rubbish comes out of their mouths, meaningless words, a waste of space. We need more honest political conversation. We need more direct accountability of particular politicians to particular voters.
What's it like in the last 20 seconds here, sitting around a table with three ex-journalists?
And when current journalists, it has been an absolute pleasure to be here this afternoon.
That's a nice place to leave this. Thank you very much. Jeff Pollak is the Conservative Party of Canada candidate. Linda Mcquaig is the NDP candidate. Chrystia Freeland is the Liberal Party candidate, and John Deverell is the Green Party candidate, and we wish all of you well on the 25th of November. All of you watching us from Toronto Centre, get out there and vote.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.